Still have to ask for 5 minutes?
That's fine. I'll leave it. It's late.
You leave it?
I'll
Okay.
call her.
Sorry, Senator Batters.
Honourable Senators, I rise to speak to this Emergencies Act motion. What a sad day it is, Honourable Senators, that it has come to this, that this Trudeau government has invoked and employed the Emergencies Act on Canadian citizens before it could even be voted on in Parliament. Tear gas and batons and lines of police to shove back protesters chanting for freedom. Truck windows smashed, bank accounts frozen, promises to hunt down even those who chose to leave the protest voluntarily. And even now, with the bridge blockades in Ottawa's protest cleared, the Prime Minister can't tell us when the Emergencies Act and its extensive government powers will be lifted, only that his government plans to make some of the features of those extensive powers permanent. The incredible division among Canadians in this moment is largely of Prime Minister Trudeau's own making. He and his government have divided Canadians among themselves, vaxxed and unvaxxed, and through his incendiary language, turned them on one another. From the time of the election onwards, Prime Minister Trudeau has used this public health emergency as a political wedge issue, without regard for the Canadians in the middle who have become collateral damage. He has called them extremists, racists, and says they are misogynists. Prime Minister Trudeau preaches tolerance, but says those who chose not to be vaccinated against COVID-19, quote, take up room, and questions, quote, do we tolerate these people? And when these Canadians, in many cases Canadians who have lost much or have lost everything as a result of COVID-19 mandates, land on Parliament's doorstep to have their voices heard, what does the Prime Minister do? Instead of hearing them out or empathizing with the frustration they are feeling, he doubles down and calls them a, quote, fringe minority with unacceptable views. And so each side dug in, and we wound up with a 3-week protest in front of Parliament and the unnecessary overreach of the Emergencies Act by this government. Let us not forget that it was Prime Minister Trudeau who counselled Indian Prime Minister Modi to engage in dialogue when 50,000 farmers blockaded the roads to New Delhi in 2020, a protest that went on for a year. Prime Minister Trudeau boasted, quote, Canada will always be there to defend the right of peaceful protest, quote. Yet he has refused from the get-go to engage in dialogue with the blue-collar working people who were demonstrating right here on Wellington Street. Honourable Senators, throughout this pandemic, we have been fortunate to still collect our paychecks, to maintain access to our health plans and other benefits, to be able to work remotely from the comfort of our homes when necessary. Many of the people living in this public service city and downtown have also been fortunate. But there are other Canadians who have had a very different experience during this pandemic. Many have lost their jobs, their businesses, and their livelihoods, some as the result of circumstance, others due to vaccine mandates. The financial loss, the social isolation, the vilification promoted by the government, it's all resulted in a growing frustration that has culminated in the trucker convoy and blockades we've seen across the country. In Saskatchewan and Alberta, where many of these truckers came from, people were already suffering economic devastation prior to this pandemic because of the anti-energy policies of the Trudeau government. The ever-ballooning carbon tax is a further burden. Meanwhile, the oil and gas industry has been vilified in this country. Only last week in BC, we saw protesters violently attack the Coastal GasLink pipeline work camp with axes and terrorize workers, and certainly with no discussion of invoking the Emergencies Act in response from the government. And while the movement started from a place of resistance to vaccine mandates, it quickly expanded to become about freedom more generally. And the more the government and the Prime Minister in Ottawa spoke divisively against the protesters, demonizing them and refusing to listen, the wider and more expansive the movement became.